Have you ever scrolled through the news and just had this feeling that something's off? Like you're only getting a carefully selected part of the story? What if I told you that a key change to an old law might be one of the biggest reasons why? Today, we read pulling back the curtain on something that quietly but dramatically reshaped the news you see every single day, the Smith-MundtAct. This isn't just some boring piece of legislation from the 1940s. Its story is directly tied to the trust or the serious lack of it that so many of us feel towards the media. Because we're about to unravel how a law meant to protect Americans from propaganda got flipped on its head. To really get this, we have to go back to the original Smith-Mundt Act of 1948. Here's the crucial part. The original law had a very strict domestic firewall. It explicitly banned the government from showing the news and media it made for foreign audiences to people here in the United States. The lawmakers back then were worried about the U.S. government using its own taxpayer-funded media to influence its own citizens. They wanted to prevent the state from becoming a propaganda machine aimed at its own people. It was a safeguard, a clear line drawn in the sand. So, content from Voice of America could be broadcast to someone in Moscow, but not so people in Milwaukee. Informational films could be shown in Tokyo, but not in Toledo. The American media landscape was meant to be its own, independent ecosystem, free from the direct influence of the government's foreign messaging. This separation was seen as absolutely essential for a healthy democracy. The press was supposed to be a watchdog, not a government mouthpiece. And for over 60 years, that firewall held strong. But then, the world changed. The internet happened, information started flying around the globe in seconds, and slowly, a new argument began to take shape inside Washington, D.C. Government officials started saying that this firewall was outdated. They argued that in a world of instant global communication, it was just impractical to stop Americans from seeing what their own government was telling the rest of the world. Why should you have to use a special server to see a video your government made public in another country? This argument really started to pick up steam, especially after 9/11, when the idea of a global war of ideas became a major focus. The conversation shifted. It went from, how do we protect Americans from government influence, to how do we make sure the government's message can compete in a crowded digital world. The stage was being set for a massive change, one that would quietly but profoundly reshape American media. The real tipping point came in 2012, tucked away inside the massive National Defense Authorization Act. A huge military spending bill was a small but powerful amendment, the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. This amendment did one simple thing. It tore down that 64-year-old firewall. It completely removed the ban on distributing government-made foreign media within the United States. The change was passed with support from both parties, with very little public debate or media attention. And on January 1, 2013, it became law. Suddenly, the floodgates were open. The enormous amount of content produced by the U.S. government for other countries, news articles, radio shows, documentaries, social media content could now be legally distributed and broadcast right here at home. Now, the people who pushed for this change said it was just about modernization and transparency. They argued it was just leveling the playing field. They said that since foreign governments and other groups were pushing their own narratives online, the U.S. government needed the ability to counter that information, both abroad and at home. They promised this wasn't about propaganda. Sounds reasonable. Critics immediately sounded the alarm. They saw this not as modernization, but as crossing a very dangerous line. The exact protection the original law was created for to prevent government overreach was now gone. The big concern was that this would blur the lines between public diplomacy and domestic persuasion, between information and propaganda. Think about it this way. The U.S. Agency for Global Media, which runs outlets like Voice of America, has an annual budget of hundreds of millions of dollars. It employs thousands of journalists and content creators. It's a massive global media network. Before 2013, that entire machine was pointed outward at the rest of the world. After 2013, it could legally be pointed inward at us. This brings us to the heart of the matter. What does this mean for the news you actually consume every day? When government-funded content can be legally mixed into the domestic media ecosystem, it can influence reporting in subtle but really significant ways. First, Let's talk about controlled messaging. The content made by these government agencies is, by its very nature, designed to align with U.S. foreign policy goals. Their mission is to inform, engage, and connect people in support of freedom and democracy. That is a mission statement with a clear point of view. So, when this content is made available for domestic use, it becomes a free, professionally produced source of material for news outlets here in the U.S. Imagine a local news station that can't afford to send reporters overseas. They might be tempted to use a video package produced by a government agency. It looks good, it's free, and it fills a hole in their newscasts. But by doing that, they're broadcasting a perspective that is tied to government policy, often without making that clear to the audience. The person watching at home just sees it as the news. Over time, this can subtly steer the public conversation on an issue, nudging it in a direction that aligns with the government's goals. This leads directly to the second huge issue, the erosion of media trust. Let's be real, trust in the media is already at a historic low. People are more skeptical than ever, and for good reason. The fact that the government can legally pump its own version of events into the domestic news stream just adds gasoline to that fire of skepticism. It creates a situation where it's hard to tell the difference between independent journalism and government-sponsored content. When you see a news report that perfectly mirrors the State Department's talking points, is it because journalists independently reach the same conclusion? Or is it because the report was sourced, directly or indirectly, from government-made material? This confusion undermines the credibility of all media. It encourages people to just dismiss everything as propaganda, making it impossible for us to agree on a basic set of facts, and a democracy can't function like that. Finally, we have to talk about a more subtle form of information control. When the government becomes a major player in the information market, it can have a crowding out effect. The sheer amount of free content from government sources can make it harder for smaller, independent media outlets with different viewpoints to compete. It also creates a feedback loop. News outlets might think twice about running a story that's highly critical of government policy if they rely on government sources or access for other reports. The line between journalism and public relations gets dangerously blurry. The government story, backed by a massive budget, can become the main story, not through force, but just by being the easiest and most available source of information. This isn't some grand conspiracy. It's just the natural result of a system where the government is both a subject of the news and a major producer of it. So, where does this leave us? The Smith-Mundt Modernization Act was passed to adapt to a new information age, but in doing so, it removed a crucial safeguard that protected the integrity of our media environment. It has contributed to a world where the lines are blurred, trust is fragile, and the government's voice can easily blend in with and, sometimes, overpower the voices of independent journalism. Understanding this is all about being a more critical, informed consumer of news. It's about asking questions. When you watch a report, especially about international affairs, ask yourself, where is this information coming from? Who made this footage? What's the perspective here? And are there other perspectives I'm not seeing? Being aware of this dynamic is the first step toward reclaiming a healthier relationship with information. It empowers us to look beyond the headlines, seek out different sources, and support the kind of independent journalism that holds power accountable, instead of just repeating its message. The media world has been transformed, and it's up to all of us to navigate it with our eyes wide open. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive. I know it's a complex topic, but it's one we all need to understand. If you found this video informative, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores the systems that shape our world. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on this. I'd love to hear your perspective. See you next time.